So as it sounds, when I asked this question in Parliament in September of last year, the answer came that from the Minister for Justice, was Mr. Feetham, obviously. He stated that Gibraltar is too small. He'd been advised that Gibraltar is too small for Meghan's, for Sarah's law, which would obviously give some access to the names of sex offenders, of convicted sex offenders on our register, because we do hold a list, the police do hold a list of sex offenders who actually have conditions imposed upon them, and who are obviously very, very kept closely upon, a watchful eyes kept upon them when they're out in the public. So once they've served a potential sentence in prison, once they're out in the public and they're potentially on parole, and even beyond parole, sometimes these offenders remain on this list, and they are watched closely. But what I was advocating for when I asked that question, and where I was hitting at, was a potential introduction of Sarah's law. Because when I asked the question in Parliament, the answer came that Gibraltar's too small, as we've heard, but the answer also came that the police, the RGP, currently do get the odd question and request from members of the public, and they take a view as to what information could be given to those members of the public as to whether an individual may pose a risk to a child or a vulnerable person within our community. Now, that sounds remarkably like Sarah's law, except Sarah's law is within legislation in the UK, and simply put, we don't have that, a parallel to that. So perhaps what needs to be looked at is whether we actually put this into law here, because that means that we then operate within a specific framework, and that, for example, the RGP have protection and they know within which arena to operate. And so it gives protection to those officers, and it gives them a framework and guidelines to work within when they're actually exercising discretion as to what information is given to a member of the public who might seek such information. What I also think is very important within Gibraltar, because we're such a small place, is to avoid instances of, for example, vigilante justice, particularly when it comes to family members of individuals who may have been found guilty of such offences. Family members like children who may have had absolutely no knowledge of these offences and who are absolutely innocent. And that is, I think, where the protection needs to lie. So it then comes within the remit of the police to make those decisions, and it is within their discretion what information they give to that member of the public. And that information that is given would remain confidential to the individual that it's given to.
I think that's where one of the concerns arises, which is in Gibraltar, it might be very difficult to keep that secret, and what would the necessary follow-up then would be to criminalise the act of sharing this information. Do you think that you're opening Pandora's box if you start allowing for information to be shared with some members of the community and requiring them to keep it a secret?
Potentially. And I suspect that is exactly where the fear comes and the fear lies in actually opening, as you say, Pandora's box. But the flip side of this is that at the moment, the system within which information is given or not given is very opaque. And members of the public, I think, have a right to some information as to, for example, whether their children are having to go to a club where perhaps a sex offender is working. It doesn't happen often, but it can happen. It can happen where they go under the radar. And of course, the parole system is designed to catch that out so that these offenders are not allowed within a certain radius of a club or anywhere where a child is at, or anywhere where a victim of the same sort of, should we say, makeup would be. So if it's a vulnerable victim, they're not allowed within a certain radius of a specific place. But Gibraltar, like everywhere else, has the danger that perhaps that information will get out. On the other hand, if we look at the information that's already disseminated by the media, once a person perhaps is convicted, the name is put out there, and there is information as to the sentence that person receives out, because and the public can actually access that information because it is part of a transparent justice system.